While one mentions about the face of 20th century, there is nothing one can think of but those conflicts which lead many of the lives that time take a halt. Yes, it is about nothing else but World War I and World War II, which took place in 1914 to 1918 and 1939 to 1945, respectively, involving many of the different international countries. The main cause of these major conflicts is believed to be the differences between the German, Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian Empire and the British, Russian, French empires. It is believed that there were many of the chemical weapons used at the time of World War I, which was, by the way, not allowed according to the Hague Agreement. It was an Ottoman Empire which was blamed for the death of millions of Americans during that conflict. Moving over to the next, Second World War, that first ever war in which atomic bombs were used that made many of the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki get damaged. Germany is considered as the major reason behind those different massacres that led to the destruction of many of the livings and specifically which led to the killing of around 6 million numbers of Jews. As a result of these wars, many of the national Germans would tore their way out of the different international countries. Japan was now in the headlines about being involved in the attacks of conflict, and that too without getting anything informed. This war, thus, made that huge impact in the books of history, bringing on the fact about how millions of people got their life devastated as a result of this conflict. And this whole of the destruction, which made World War I and II a huge matter to have a discussion on, there are also many of the worries being widespread about that probable World War III. World War III. Third World War, or World War III, is actually the name which is not linked to any tragedy that has already happened in the history, but the one which is about the fear of possibility of a third huge conflict that may include any number of different countries. There are many of the assumptions made in relation to this war, according to which some of people applied a term to not so huge conflicts like Cold War or War of Terror. And on the other side, some people believe that this third war would bring over more of the destructions within as in comparison to the previous two. Though the fear here cannot be really considered as that wrong to care about, as the development of nuclear weapons after World War II are believed to be used in the conflict. And this does not really end here, because the use of these weapons would result into a huge amount of damage and devastation that can lead millions or trillions of lives to death. More to add, the effect of this use of weapons would not really end here, as according to the research it has been said that this would also lead into making the surface of Earth completely uninhabitable, which as a result would get people either underground to make their living, or maybe with colonies settled at space. Before the emergence of Second World War, it was believed that First World War actually took place to end whole of the other wars, named as the War to End All Wars. It is all because watching such war happen made people think that there cannot be any other war as much huge and dangerous as the first one already was. Also during this period, i.e. before World War II, the First World War was generally known by the name of the Great War, as no one really knew what is going to be happening next. But unfortunately, during the year of 1939, when World War II finally made a beginning, there was a clear picture that now mankind can be said as already on the pace of suffering such global wars. During the year of Cold War in 1947, and also the spreading of nuclear weapons to those parts of Soviet Union made this probability of Third World War get a raise. In fact, during this war, it was almost confirmed that a Third World War is just going to take its peak with whole of the planning of making destruction in different countries. There were many of the scenarios made in connection to the same, according to which this conflict can made range from being a conventional one to very destructive, in case nuclear weapons were used. Also, one of the scenarios, known by the name of mutually assured destruction, almost enlightened the fact that this use of nuclear weapons can lead to the larger destruction and a real huge destruction on Earth, which can make whole of the human life take a halt. This scenario is actually believed to be the reason of avoiding the use of any kind of such dangerous weapons. Different scenarios of Third Giant War. Though after the First World War took a halt, it was believed by a majority of people that this was actually meant to end every other war, but all of their hope went in vain with the beginning of Second World War. And this was the war which made people believe that this is not going to end here, the main reason behind which was the evolution of nuclear weapons. As a result of this fear, there were many of the things that government and armies of different countries brought their focus on, and that was to get prepared for the worst of conditions. There is a long list of plans that were being prepared to deal with the situations during Third Giant War, some of which are now out of date and thus cannot be brought in action. Operation Unthinkable. To start with, this actually sounds too much weird to be called as a plan for applying in the Third World War, but this operation does not really has anything with the word unthinkable, as the name depicts. This actually is, or actually was, some kind of code name which used to describe two of the correlated plans that were being made for dealing with a war that was believed to take place between Western allies and the Soviet Union. This plan was actually the creation of British Prime Minister's mind, which at that time was Winston Churchill, and brought in existence by the British Armed Forces Joint Planning Staff as soon as the World War II came to halt. It is being said that Winston Churchill was quite concerned about a huge amount of Soviet forces getting deployed, and so he, in order to have his country from any kind of threat, he made this plan out. For the Soviet forces, which were positioned in Germany at that time, both of these giant attacks were nothing less than a surprise which they had to deal with. The plan made in here had actually a motive to enforce the will of the Western associates on Soviets, according to which the will here was actually skilled as the square deal for Poland, which was clearly meant to enforce the Yalta Agreement on them. The whole of the plan made by Winston got abandoned after some odds were judged in whole of the scene. Though the plan never ever during the time of its creation was known to anyone other than the people involved in same, but it got public during the time of 1988, in which it was applied to the Cold War instead. Operation Dropshot. Now, here comes the next code name, which is actually linked to the United States Department of Defense and is linked to the emergency plan which was prepared and developed to deal with the almost possible atomic and conservative conflict with Soviet Union and its associates, so as to finish every possibility of Soviet Union taking over a control on the parts of Western Europe, Near East, and also including some of the areas of Eastern Asia that was predictable to make a beginning around the year of 1957. This plan was believed to be prepared during the initial phases of the Cold War, which is during the year of 1949, and then got released in public during the time of 1977. It is also said that this plan was actually bringing nuclear weapons in use, and so which made them not to expect any kind of major and important role in the war. The picture was actually brought in action before the expansion of international ballistic missiles, and also it was developed before the situation which made the plan for US nuclear war get changed from the city-killing counter-value attack plan to counterforce that was at major targeted to military forces, and the change here was made by Robert McNamara and President Kennedy. Also, according to the reports, it has been said that at that time of the era, these nuclear weapons were not used to be as much precise as they are believed to be now. That is, they were not that much capable to hit a direct naval base without abolishing the part of the country which is contiguous to it. So basically, the main focus while bringing them in use was to get whole of the enemy's industrial capacity destroyed, so as to get whole of their economy kept for war vanished. Exercises Grand Slam, Long Step and Main Brace. It was about the time of January 1950 when an armed strategy of containment made and managed by Nato got an approval from the North Atlantic Council. And this military development made by Nato took on a transformed firmness which resulted into the eruption of Korean War during the time of early 1950s, encouraging NATO to launch an army under the federal expertise. Exercise Grand Slam. This was actually initial major naval exercise which was freshly designed by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as Nato. This naval exercise, which is believed to be the combined one, actually took place in the Mediterranean Sea in mid of the dates of 25th of February to 16th of March during the year of 1952, and also this comprised a marine army that was in whole of this plan labelled as being that major navy to be accumulated in that part of the country since the termination of Second World War. This most initial exercise is also considered as that early test for the Allied force of NATO that were based in Southern Europe. Exercise Mainbrace. This is another name in the list of exercises which was undertaken by the very lately recognized Allied Command Atlantic, which were also known to people by the name of Ackland, and which were believed to be one of those two major army directives of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization known as NATO. It was the Supreme Allied Commander Atlantic Admiral Lynn D. McCormick, USN, and Supreme Allied Commander Europe General Matthew B. Ridgway, which were behind the development of all of these plans and exercises directed by NATO, and of which this exercise here was also another part. It is believed that the original preparation for this exercise, named as Mainbrace, was introduced by the General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and that too before signing up his letter of resignation from the post of Supreme Allied Commander Europe, also known as SORCER, in NATO, so as to further take a route for becoming the President of the United States. This exercise is said to be directed for over 12 counting days between the dates of September 14th to 25th in 1952, and had 9 total armies involved within, namely United States Navy, the British Royal Navy, French Navy, Royal Danish Navy, Portuguese Navy, Royal Canadian Navy, Royal Norwegian Navy, Royal Netherlands Navy and Belgian Naval Force, which were functioning at the Norwegian Sea, the Barents Sea, North Sea that was nearby the Jutland Point, and the Baltic Sea. The main objective behind this exercise is said as in order to persuade Denmark and Norway that their areas and states could be fortified from the attack of Soviet Union. Exercise Long Step. Now, here comes another name in the list of exercises, which in comparison to others was a 10-day naval exercise organized by NATO, which took place in the Mediterranean Sea during the time of November 1952, and that too underneath the complete knowledge of Admiral Robert B. Carney, USN, who was the Commander-in-Chief, Allied Forces Southern Europe, also abbreviated as SINCAF South. It is said that this implementation had those over 170 numbers of warships and also 700 aircraft involved in the plan, and also in addition to that this operation included a significant amphibious attack alongside the western shore of areas of Turkey. This exercise in combination with exercise named as Grand Slam is a general believed to be turned out as kind of an example for many of those future NATO naval exercises that are to be performed in the Mediterranean Sea at the time of Cold War. The very main aim of Allied blue forces was to remove opponent green attacking militaries from their conquering locations in the areas of Eastern Mediterranean, among which green forces comprised of an air force, which was originally an Italian 56th Tactical Force, and also the submarines of countries like United States, Great Britain, France, Greece and Turkey lying in there, so as to trap the blue amphibious group passing from those Italian embarkation harbours. Also, in addition to that, there were involved 170 numbers of warships and also the 700 numbers of aircrafts in Operation Longstep. Longstep is also actually believed to be an initial effort to assimilate those various numbers of naval forces into that one joint force that was at whole assisted under the command of NATO. In addition to that, other significant feature of Longstep was joint preparation under the management of communications through radio and wire in mid of various numbers of ships, aircrafts and also the ground militaries of that sixth nation. Operation Strike Back. This operation, or exercise here, can actually be considered as another name in the list of various exercises which were conducted by North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO. The only difference is that this was one of those major naval exercises that took place for over a time period of 10 days during the time period in September 1957. Being another part of many of those different exercises which were carried out in order to imitate a Supreme Soviet attack on the forces of NATO, this operation named as Strike Back was originally had those two major objectives, among which the very primary focus was the disposition of naval armies of NATO, which were designated as Blue Fleet, against those other armed forces of NATO in order to make an attempt in simulating an army in opposition that contained really huge numbers of submarines labelled as Orange Fleet. And on the other side, the second aim was to make that Blue Fleet accomplish all of those air attacks that was based on career against the enemy creations. There were at most 200 numbers of warships, 650 aircrafts, and 75,000 employees from different armed forces, namely the United States Navy, the Royal Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy, the French Navy, the Royal Netherlands Navy, and the Royal Norwegian Navy involved in this operation of Strike Back. This operation being considered as one of those largest peacetime marine operations in the matter of that time, it was being said this exercise assembled the toughest striking navy gathered since the time of World War II by the military predictor named as Hanson W. Baldwin of the New York Times. Also, it is being said that this process of strike back and also those other simultaneous NATO exercises which were detained through the fall of 1957 would consider to be the most determined army undertaking for the association till date, that included more than 250,000 men in numbers, 300 ships and 1,500 aircrafts working from the areas of Norway to Turkey. Some other scenarios. In addition to those already mentioned in the previous chapter, there are also some other of the scenarios and plans that were made by the governments and armies in order to protect their nation, their country from any kind of threat that this Third World War was carrying within. Exercise Reforger. This operation now was that final exercise directed by NATO during the times of Cold War, which actually has the name Reforger, directed from the return of forces to Germany. The exercise here was envisioned to confirm that NATO had the skill of rapidly organized militaries to the area of West Germany in the occasion of a fight with the Warsaw Agreement. Although most of the crowd so organized were from the area of United States, the process also included a significant amount of groups from those other NATO states, such as Canada and also the United Kingdom. This exercise, named as Reforger, was first considered during the year of 1967. The Johnson management brought out their strategies to remove at the most 2 splits from the area of Europe during the year of 1968. In order to demonstrate their ongoing commitment towards the defense of NATO, and also in addition to that of demonstrating their ability of swift support, there was a huge amount of force organization scheduled that would organize a split part or more of it to the area of West Germany in a steady annual exercise. The initial type of this exercise was at very first time directed in the beginning of 1969 on 6th of January. And these are considered to be as those operations which continued annually even after the termination of the Cold War, but not during the year of 1989 till the date of 1993. The exercise Reforger, conducted in the year of 1975, marked the operative occurrence of the United States Marine Force in the area of Europe for the very first time, and that too from the time of World War I, when the second number of Marine Division's 32nd number of Marine Amphibious Unit, also abbreviated as 32nd MAU, was organized from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, as one of the major share of that operation. Also, it is being said that the Reforger 1988 was that time allocated as the major European ground movement from the date of ending of World War II, as that time around 125,000 numbers of crowds were organized. Operation Reforger here was not only considered as a demonstration of power during any conflict-like cases, it was rather a genuine strategy which was made in order to support the occurrence of NATO in the area of Europe. And so, looking over that incident, it would have been mentioned too as Exercise Reforger. Most of the main constituents in Reforger are said to be comprised of the Military Airlift Command, the Military Sealift Command, and also the Civil Reserve Air Fleet. Also, in addition to all, it has been said that a rapid reinforcement ability of US Army was worked upon finally and hence improved by applying the process of prepositioning enormous shares of apparatus and provisions in the area of Europe, and that too at Pomka's sites. The upkeep of this apparatus has delivered widespread on-the-job training to many of those support units. There are also many of the other operations which serve that same purpose as the Reforger does, and these are named as Operation Bright Star, the biannual disposition of American Army and Air Force units to Egypt. 7 days to the River Rhine. 7 days to the River Rhine. This was actually an operation which was considered as a top-secret Navy imitation operation that was brought in light during the year of 1979 by the Warsaw Agreement. This operation was actually the complete portrayal of the vision of Soviet bloc about the 7-day nuclear conflict that was brought in between NATO and Warsaw Pact militaries. This was the operation which actually was brought in existence with the notion that NATO would perform a nuclear outbreak under the area of Vistula River Basin in a first strike situation, which would as a result bring under as many as 2 million number of Polish citizen fatalities. In answer to which, a counter-strike from the area of Soviet would be coming out against the areas of West Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands and Denmark, with Warsaw Agreement armed forces attacking the area of West Germany and thus focusing over to break at the shores of River Rhine by the last day, that is at the 7th day. In addition to this, there are many of those other strategies from the side of USSR which made their plan take a stop only after reaching at the border of France, i.e. on 9th day. Separate Warsaw Agreement nations, on the other hand, the one which were allocated their own subpart only, and that too of the tactical depiction. Basically, in this situation, Polish militaries were only estimated to get as much distant as Germany. These 7 long days, which were the part of Rhine Plan, anticipated that nations of Poland and Germany would get devastated real huge amount, reason behind which could have been nuclear exchanges, and those large statistics of crowds would expire because of the sickness caused by radiations. That time, it was also being predicted that NATO would fire nuclear missiles behind the preceding Soviet lines so as to destroy all of the supply lines and hence dull their development. Although it was being assumed that NATO would be using those nuclear missiles in order to push back those Warsaw Pact attacks, but it did not really comprise any kind of nuclear attacks on the area of France or also the United Kingdom. Also, while all this was happening, newspapers came out with the conclusion that when this plan was actually declassified, areas of France and the UK were not at all on the focus of being attacked so as to get them the suppress of their own nuclear weapons. Exercise Able Archer. Able Archer 83 is that another scenario which is actually the code name for the command post operation related to that was brought in action during the time of November 1983 by the Management Committee of North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also abbreviated as NATO. Looking over the other Able Archer operations from former years, the main goal of this exercise now was to imitate an era of battle appreciation and thus concluding in a replicated DEFCON 1 synchronized atomic attack. Synchronized from the head offices in Casteau, Belgium, named as Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, abbreviated as SHAPE Headquarters, it is also included NATO militaries through all over the Western Europe, making a start on the date of November the 7th, 1983, and then terminating after 5 long days. And now, this operation, which was carried out in 1983, presented out numerous new essentials which were not at all appreciated in any of the former years, counting under which a new, exclusive arrangement of coded message, radio silences, and also including the membership of heads of the government. This upsurge in sanity, in combination with worsening relationships among the areas of the United States, the Soviet Union, and also the almost predicted entrance of Pershing II nuclear weaponries in the nation of Europe, made some of the associates of the Soviet Politburo and army to consider that Able Archer 83 was actually a trick that was brought in plan for bringing over a war, concealing arrangements for a sincere strike using those nuclear weapons. In reply to which, the Soviets got their nuclear armies well prepared and thus positioned many of the air components in the areas of East Germany and Poland being on alert. But this whole of the threat linked with nuclear forces finally took a hold with the decision of operation on November 11th. There are many of those historians who even have argued on the sentence that this operation of Able Archer 83 was one of those periods when whole of world had come broadening to nuclear conflict since the Cuban Missile disaster during the time of 1962. And on the other hand, some of them believe that the only occurrence that fetched whole of the world nearer to such a huge conflict was the incident linked to Norwegian rocket during the time of 1995. Strategic Defense Initiative. The Strategic Defense Initiative, also known to people by the abbreviation SDI, was in general a well-planned system which can make it easy to defend some rocket or maybe a missile so as to guard the nation of United States from an outbreak that was believed to be done by ballistic strategic nuclear weapons, that is the international flying weaponries. The organization, which was brought in to associate ground-based components and also the orbital disposition stages, was at very first openly proclaimed by Ronald Reagan, the president, on the date March 23, 1983. The very main focus of this initiative was noticed on making well-planned defense in comparison to any of the previous strategic offense policy of mutual assured destruction, also abbreviated as MAD. It was in 1984 when the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization, also known as SDIO, was settled up inside the area of United States Department of Defense so as to adverse the Strategic Defense Initiative. Reagan was believed to be the speaking opponent of MAD policy, and SDI was considered as a major part of his resistance policy that was envisioned to finish MAD as an atomic discouragement strategy, adding to which is a planned creativity to counteract the military constituent of the Soviet Union's nuclear defenses. The determined initiative was assessed for supposedly frightening to undermine the MAD approach and to probably reignite an aggressive arms fight. SDI was labelled principally in the typical broadcasting as Star Wars, after the widespread movie by George Lucas that was released in the year of 1977. During the year of 1987, the American Physical Society decided that a global protection such as Star Wars was enormously determined and with current equipment not directly possible for effective status, and after the research of around 10 more years, it was desirable to study about such an inclusive and composite system to set up and make it completely functional. NATO nuclear sharing. Nuclear sharing is generally a notion in NATO's strategy of atomic discouragement, which is comprised of many of the associated countries, and that too without using nuclear weapons of their own, so as to get into the training for using those nuclear missiles provided by NATO, and in certain delivers for the armed militaries of these nations to be included in conveying these missiles during the occasion of their use. Being the part of the function of nuclear sharing, these countries who participate into the same works in carrying out the discussions and thus take some mutual choices on nuclear missile strategy sustain procedural apparatus which is considered as vital for making the use of nuclear arms, including all of the warplanes that are talented enough to get them delivered and supply nuclear weapons on their ground. And moreover, in any warlike circumstances, the United States told NATO associates the Non-Proliferation Treaty, also known as NPT, would no longer be monitoring. Also, the point which is important to make a notice on here is that out of all of the 3 nuclear powers involved in the operation of NATO, that is France, the United Kingdom and the United States, it was only the United States which initiated in providing missiles for the purpose of nuclear sharing. Triggers to nuclear conflicts. As every nation, especially the United States and Soviet Union, was quite concerned about that third huge conflict which was believed to take place any time, and thus which made them to prepare for the same. In addition to that, there were many of those different events which were getting over a possibility of making this conflict a possibility. 25th of June 1950 to 27th of July 1953. This is the time period when Korean War was on its peak, where two divisions were fighting with each other so as to have a control over the Korean peninsula, where one side, the communist side, was sustained by China and the USSR, and another one, the capitalist one, was sustained by the UN and also the United States. There were many people who assumed that this war would worsen and which would lead into becoming a full-blown conflict between the three giants. The communicator linked to CBS War, named as Bill Downs, transcribed during the time of 1951 that, to my mind, the answer is, yes, Korea is going to be the reason for beginning of World War III. Though this war during the years of 1950 to 1953 didn't turn out to be that huge conflict that can make them involve nuclear wars, as this war ended in 1953 by signing over an agreement by both of the sides. It has been said that this communicator of wars also made his words repeated during the reporting of USS Pueblo incident, which took place in 1968. 15th to 28th of October 1962. Now, coming over to the next one, this was the period when Cuban Missile Crisis took people's attention towards the conflict. This was actually the war that took place on the posting of Soviet nuclear weaponries in Cuba in answer to the disastrous Bay of Pigs attack. It is deliberated to be very much close in becoming the nuclear exchange which might have triggered a Third World War. Although it didn't take any such shape to get transformed into huge conflict as on November the 20th, 1962, this crisis finally took a halt as a result of getting all of the aggressive missiles and light bombers withdrawn from the area of Cuba. 6th to 25th of October 1973. A period of time which discusses about the Yom Kippur War, also known to people by the name of Ramadan War or October War, made its beginning with Arab triumphs and thus which resulted into getting Israel successfully counterattacked. Though this brought over those lost of tensions between the nations of the US that sustained Israel and also the Soviet Union, which stood in the support of Arab states. Thus, which brought both of them, America and also the Soviet Marine forces, come close in order to fire upon each other. Admiral Murphy of the US calculated the probabilities of the Soviet troops struggling over making a first attack against his navy at 40%. Both of the giants, though, had been pressed to the edge of conflict, but all of these pressures took an ease with a break in fighting that came in under UNSC 339. 9th of November 1979. There were many of the revenge programs prepared by the United States after the time NORAD found on-screen warnings that a full-blown attack from the side of Soviet had already been brought up. Instead of making any kind of red telephone hotline to get a clear vision of the situation with the USSR, they started making over the revenge systems and stooped not until an early warning radar organizations confirmed that there was not any kind of launch made from the other side. A representative who was there inside the NORAD competence at the time labeled an atmosphere of complete terror. 26th of September 1983. This was a date when a wrong alarm brought whole of the people's attention that happened on the Soviet nuclear early caution system, indicating the launch of American Minuteman ICBMs from origins in the areas of United States. A revengeful attack was prohibited by Stanislav Petrov, who was the major of Soviet air defense forces, who comprehended that the system in here had merely crashed, which was swallowed out by other later inquiries. 2nd to 11th November 1983. During the operation of Able Archer 83, a 10-day Nato exercise imitating an era of war acceleration that ended in a DEFCON 1 atomic attack, some associates of the Soviet Politburo and equipped militaries preserved the actions as a trick of war, covering a sincere first strike. In response to this, the army got itself organized for a synchronized counterattack by preparing nuclear militaries and inserting air units posted in the Warsaw Agreement conditions of the nations of East Germany and Poland under high alert. However, the state of Soviet training for revenge stopped upon conclusion of the Able Archer movements. 25th of January 1995. This is the date which highlights the Norwegian rocket incident that is believed to be happened when the early warning station of Olenegorskov Russian Federation unit intentionally misidentified the radar sign from the researching rocket of Black Brand 12, which was together launched by Norwegian and also the US scientists from the Andoya rocket range, as seeming to be the radar sign of the introduction of a Trident SLBM rocket. In response to this, President Boris Yeltsin was called, and then the Chegit nuclear portfolio was triggered for the very first and last time. Whole of the situation made High Command known that the missile was not going to enter the airspace of Russia and thus punctually terminated plans for battle readiness and revenge. As a result of this, it was finally resoluted that although the rocket experts had made whole of the information to all of those 30 states, which also included Russia, about the test takeoff, but this information did not really reach the Russian radar specialists. Though there were many of the predictions and scenarios made in relation to the Third World War so as to be prepared for any of the threatening experiences which as a result led to the development of various numbers of those nuclear missiles and forces. There are many of such places which are believed to be the triggering part of World War III, and which would thus lead to the huge amount of destruction, among which the most common are the Korean Peninsula, Syria, war in cyberspace, South Asia and Baltic Sea. And now, according to many of the reports, it has also been said that according to the assumption made by some commentator, it is being said that Donald Trump can be the major reason behind the Third Giant War.